Hello and welcome to this live webinar training. I'm Chris Badgett from LifterLMS and I have a special guest, Brendan Tully from WP SpeedFix. We're actually doing a two-part training series with Brendan. Today we're talking about speed. Tomorrow we're talking about SEO for WordPress LMS website creators. But today it's all about speed. Brendan, welcome to the webinar here.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Good to be here.
I'm stoked to have you here with the LifterLMS audience. We just did a podcast episode together where we talked about both these things. We'll put a link in the chat about that episode. If you haven't checked that out, go ahead and download that or listen to that on your podcast catcher of your choice. But we talked about speed, we talked about SEO, and we talked about Brendan's journey as a course creator. So he's part and parcel to the course building community here. And I'm stoked to get into it. We are going to be giving, just in terms of format here, we're going to be doing a LifterLMS giveaway at the end of this webinar. So stay till the end, and we're going to be doing a $99 giveaway. So if you want to be eligible for that, hang out. But there's going to be a lot to learn. Brendan's, been in the trenches. He's been speeding up WordPress sites. He's a website builder, a serial entrepreneur. I'm really excited to bring him to you all today. Brendan, thanks for coming, and let's get into it, man.
Cool. Alrighty. So we have a bit of a clickbaity title here, which is, always good. So talking about site speed, let me just get my mouse to work here. Okay. So some background here.
And just while Brendan's getting started here, ask questions. We do have a Q&A box here in Zoom, and then there's the chat. And if you want to raise your hand and talk live, we have we're going to be doing Q&A at the end. So just keep that in mind as Brendan goes through this. If any questions pop up, let us know, and we're going to get to all that.
Yeah. And if we can dig into, because it is technical, right? So we can dig in on a slide if it's not clear. I mean, I know this stuff back to front, and I sometimes assume that people have a very good technical understanding, which isn't always the case. So if there's something that we need to stop on and slow down or talk about a bit more, we can do that. So. But yeah, so a bit about my background. So I've been in the online space since the early 2000s and built an online store quite quickly, quite large, and then kind of fell into selling SEO services in 2008. So we have a local SEO agency, and we started finding that hosting is the kind of foundational layer of everything you do online, and site speed became a big part, and getting clients, our local SEO and AdWords clients, on good quality hosting. We started doing this speed optimization as part of our SEO work. So it ended up, now it is its own separate business. It's a small business, but it's growing quite quickly. So wpspeedfix.com it started off as a contact form on our agency website, and now it's its own standalone business. So since we kind of started doing that, since 2015, 2016, we've optimized just over 2,000 sites now, roughly, probably close to 2,500. So we have a lot of experience with what works and what doesn't, and what's practical from a speed perspective in the real world. So what are we going to be talking about today? I'm going to give you four key things today. So people are kind of on the web today, and we've kind of been riding this wave that people are irrationally passionate about speed. It seems to be this thing that people are obsessed about and getting more obsessed about, but there's something that they're actually missing that is even more important than speed. So we'll talk about that. It's at least twice as important as speed, and it's super obvious as well. And almost nobody talks about it or is doing anything about it. We're going to talk about the speed test tools, because there's a handful of different speed test tools on the market, and some of them don't really give you the complete picture. So if you've focused on using one speed test tool, for example, Google Page Speed Insights, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that you're probably going to miss in terms of speed, and speed in a practical, real world sense that affects visitors. And we'll talk about the tools we use and how to interpret speed tools. And we're going to talk about what actually matters when it comes to speed. So all of the things you'll read online, that they're incomplete, or they're old, or they're written by, affiliate marketers or content writers who've got no technical experience, or they've optimized one site. So we're going to talk about what broadly works, and I'm going to give you some simple action steps that you can probably do a lot of them yourself, or if you have a developer access to tech resources, they should be able to do quite easily and get you some improvement in speed. or a very big improvement in speed in some cases. And then we're going to talk through a couple of live examples, and we can do some Q&A and dig into anything that we kind of missed or we need to kind of dig into in more detail. So that's what we're going to talk through. I guess, I don't know how long these slides are going to go for, maybe half an hour or something like that, maybe 40 minutes, depending on how we go with questions and everything else. And then we can do the Q&A, I guess, and go from there.
Sounds fantastic.
Cool. So why is speed important? Why are people obsessed with it? Well, there's a few reasons. So a fast site generally is a better user experience. So it means our customers are happy. People today have very short attention spans and they're quite impatient. So a faster site is just generally all around a better experience for people. Google says it helps rankings. Now, if you have a really, really slow site, it does. So if the site is noticeably slow to load, then fixing that problem, if you're sitting there waiting for the site to load, then that's going to make it rank higher. But if your site's already fast, you're probably not going to see a ranking improvement just by making it faster. But that said, to improve the speed of a website, you fix the underlying technology that drives it, which fixing some of that stuff can often improve rankings just as part of that process. And then more conversions. So, faster site, generally speed doesn't become an obstacle to conversions. So typically conversions will go up with a faster site, but it really depends on the type of site. So it depends on the visitor intent. So if you're in a high intent environment where people absolutely must have what you're buying, speed isn't going to be a big issue. But if you're on a BuzzFeed, if you click the BuzzFeed link from Facebook or something like that, you're in a low intent environment. So a slow site, is really going to have a bigger impact than when there's lower visitor intent. And then money. So, basically speed is all about making more money. Faster site should, in theory, make us more money. It's all about the commercials. So it's important to keep that last point in mind, that ultimately our goal is commercially oriented. So we want to have happier customers, we want more conversions, and all of that stuff basically puts, it falls to the bottom line. So putting more money in our pocket. So it's really important to keep that in mind, because a lot of people miss that in kind of the pursuit of the fastest loading website on the internet. Often they'll cut their legs off. They'll sacrifice the commerciality just to have a faster site.
Quick question for you, Brennan. And by the way, hello to Kimberly from Minnesota, Ann from Sydney, Robert from Baja, Kevin from Colorado. Let us know where you're calling in from, everybody. We got Lionel from Nicaragua. Welcome, Lionel. So you said you were calling into this webinar in 3G, right?
Mm-hmm. Or 4G, yeah.
Or 4G. So sometimes, especially if you work on the internet, you're often like gravitating towards the best internet you can get in the area. But that's not the case for a lot of the world. Like I think sometimes we don't realize how slow a lot of the internet is. Mm-hmm. And we think just we're an internet power user, we've got good Wi-Fi, or, we're hardwired into the internet, but that's not the experience for most. So I don't know, just the more time I spend traveling and time online, I just realize that it's not the same for everybody, right?
Yeah, and that's true. And, not everybody has that level of tech savviness. They're not that comfortable with technology. So there's a large proportion of people on the web that, if something goes slow or doesn't load, then they just get up and walk away from the computer, or, a lot of people are browsing on their phone. But I like to think, like, years ago, I watched my parents using the internet, and it was so eye-opening, because you realize that, like, everything has happened so much slower, and they read everything, and it's just a very different experience too with someone who, I don't know about you, but I spend most of my day on the internet, my work day. So there are people who aren't like that, normal people maybe.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sorry to interrupt. I was just really wanted to highlight that, how important it is, especially if somebody's in the slow area.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, so the current state of play right now with speed, slow sites suck. I don't think anybody's going to debate that. Like, everybody knows they're on a slow site. It's horrible. So speed definitely has some importance. And like I talked about, that the intent of, when you're thinking about speed from your own site, the intent is really important. So the intent of the visitor is going to really determine how important speed is. Speed optimization is only kind of one tool in our arsenal from a online marketing perspective, a commercial perspective. So it is different sites, and we'll talk about this, the different types of sites. So it is going to have a different impact depending on what type of site you have and what type of traffic and what intent that traffic has. Unfortunately, most speed test tools today have big gaps in their recommendations. So GTmetrix, PageSpeed Insights, Pingdom, there's probably a handful of other ones that people are familiar with, but a lot of them are based on, they're several years old now. So the technology driving the web's constantly changing, and a lot of those tools, there are things that they're recommending that don't really apply on the modern web today, that even just 2 or 3 years ago were important, and the things that they're missing. So there's a bit of a problem there. We're actually thinking, we're in the process of building our own tool that picks up a lot of these things, because there's just such a gap in the market with speed test tools. And like I said before, site speed optimization can be a minefield if you're trying to DIY it, because a lot of the content on the web is, especially the content that ranks high about speed optimization, is quite old or outdated, or it's just written by affiliate marketers. So they're recommending stuff that isn't necessarily the best from a, getting a results perspective. So that's kind of where speed is today. But let's talk about, so I had 4 main points we're going to go through. So let's talk about when people come to me about speed, or come to us about speed, and they send through an inquiry, there's something that most of them are missing. Especially the irrational ones, the people who are rationally passionate about speed, and it must be lightning fast. So what I want to talk about first is the uptime, the reliability, the stability and security of your site is easily twice as important as the speed. So basically, if the site is down, it has 0 speed effectively. So a lot of people are focused on optimizing the site, but they've done nothing they have no uptime monitoring in place. They're not doing any maintenance on the site, and they're not really taking care of the security of the site. So it's important, if we're looking at site speed as a commercial endeavor, if the whole purpose of looking at site speed is about making more money, being more commercial, having the site convert better, getting more customers, then the stability of the site, the uptime, the reliability is at least as important as speed, if not twice or 5 times as important. So this is usually, when we work with clients or customers, this is probably the most overlooked thing. They always ask us things like, it's fast now, does it stay fast? What else do I need to do? This is always my answer. Like, you need to be looking at these things, and they're an ongoing process as well. It's not just kind of a one and done. It's kind of something you need to have in place, especially like, if you have a membership site or LMS that, there's people on there all the time. So particularly those sites, as a type of site, an LMS is a lot heavier than a straight content site. So the reliability of the site actually is much more important than the hosting underpinning it. So broadly, it's very simple to take care of these things. So it's not difficult. It's just something that people aren't talking about. So if we're looking at uptime monitoring, you really have to have in place, because the site, what we find is, and we have uptime monitoring on all our agency sites. When we started doing it several years ago, we found that the sites on average quality hosting could be down several times a day, or they were down for several hours at nighttime while those servers were doing maintenance or backups or whatever, when they're under a lot of load. So we use, and there's lots of tools out there, there's hundreds of uptime tools, but we use uptimerobot.com. It has a free version. I think it checks the server or the site every 5 minutes, which is okay for a free tool. And then the paid version checks it every minute. So it's really simple to set up, and the alerts are really good. So it can send you a Slack message, it can send you an email, it can send you an SMS integration. It integrates with Zapier as well, so it can plug into all sorts of systems. So I'd say that's the starting point, and there's no excuse not to have the free version. Like, cost is not an obstacle there, and it's certainly not difficult to set up. So I'd say that would be the starting point. You need quality hosting. It's a shame that the kind of hosting industry has trained people to think that hosting costs $3 a month or $5 a month. You got to be realistic. If the hosting has to match the quality of the hosting has to match what you're looking to do in terms of the site, getting customers, and how many people are sitting on it at once. So a good quality host isn't that much more expensive. $3 or $5 is, the cost of a cup of coffee. Good quality hosting might be $30 a month, might be $50 a month. So it's not that much more. It's the cost of a nice lunch or something like that. So probably one of the big things as well, about a third of the people who come to us for speed stuff, they're just on poor quality hosting. It's not well matched to the type of site that's running on it. So that's a simple one to fix. Again, it's a bit of a project to migrate a site, but really simple and fairly, from a cost perspective, it's, false economy. If you're on a super cheap site, but it's down all the time, paying that little bit more, it's going to be up, it's going to be faster, and ultimately, it'll be better from a commercial perspective. One that's often missed, maintenance. Probably need to be looking at maintenance at least quarterly or every 6 months. Once plugins get past a certain age, they will start to slow down the site in some cases. So if you have plugins on your site that are a couple of years old, then there's a good chance they might be impacting speed. So having something in place, so you're at least looking at plugin updates and patches on a regular basis, both from a speed, security, and stability perspective. I think that one's pretty straightforward, but a lot of people don't have a system in place for that, or they just log into WordPress and randomly update plugins, which isn't really a great approach either. Especially when you're running an LMS that might have a lot of moving parts and plugging into other systems as well. And then backups. So with backups, we say 1 is none and 2 is 1. So we always try and have 2 backup systems. So for us, generally our approach is we have a backup on the hosting. So most good quality hosting does some sort of backup. And then right now, for all of our sites and all the sites we manage, so we manage several hundred sites at our agency. So we use BlogVault. The reason why we like BlogVault is there's 2 reasons. One is it actively tells us what it doesn't back up. So there's a handful of really popular backup plugins, WordPress, Updraft. There's a few others, but a lot of them have gaps, like they don't back up MP3 files or MP4 files or things like that. But you don't find that out until it's time to restore the backup. So BlogVault will actively tell you what tables it's not backing up in the database, and you can go in and select those tables, because a lot of backup plugins will only back up the default WordPress tables. And we discovered that on one of our membership sites. We use Digital Access Pass, which uses a different naming format for the database tables. We went to do a restore one day, and it hadn't been backed up in years. So it's really important that using good quality backup tools and you have visibility into what they're doing. And the real-time backup is really good as well. So, a new member signs up, or you you sell something, a new order, that's a change inside WordPress. So with that real-time functionality, that change is being backed up. So for an LMS and for a WooCommerce site, that's really important. And then from a security perspective, so basic security stuff, proper passwords on everything, different passwords for everything. Not using the same password on every site. We use 1Password to manage passwords. And then looking at something like Cloudflare or Security to sit in front of the site that will kind of filter traffic live, like it's a proper firewall service, and then some sort of plugin on the site to kind of handle people trying to brute force passwords and things like that. So Security or WordFence, or if you're on a managed host like WP Engine, some of those features are built into it. So that's kind of the broad strokes from looking at uptime, stability, security, and maintenance. And none of that's really super technical. It's all fairly DIY. It's just a case of checking those boxes and making sure they're all sorted. So that's that one. I think that's all we had there. Cool. Okay. So let's talk about speed test tools. Which ones you probably should be using, which ones you shouldn't be using. Now, there's this weird
Test.net for me.
Really?
I mean, that's what I've used. But well, that's just my
internet speed.
Internet speed, but you're talking about website speed. Sorry.
Website speed.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a weird assumption. Like we get a lot of customers that come to us and they want 100 score on Google Page Speed Insights. There's this they have this irrational idea that if they have 100 score on Page Speed Insights, they'll be #1 at Google, which is not the truth. So Page Speed Insights in particular doesn't actually measure speed. It measures the site against the technical checklist that kind of correlates with speed, but it's incomplete. So it's important that you don't just use that when looking at speed stuff. GTmetrix is a little bit better, but it's also missing. It has some big gaps. So it's important to be aware of those. And in Google Analytics actually has a speed section as well that will tell you how fast the site is loading, but the data in there is so far away from what's actually happening in the real world that it might as well be completely wrong. It actually only samples 1% of your total website visitors. So it's, from a statistical perspective, it's useless, and the way it measures speed isn't great either. So it's important to be aware of those things when you're looking at these speed test tools. I guess from a, don't be so focused on the numbers that, you're taking them as gospel, I guess. The tool we use is right now tools.pingdom.com, because it's the closest to real world speed. And generally speaking, our goal is to get under 1 second in pingdom. So once the site is under 1 second in pingdom, and the speed still needs some interpretation, but once we're under 1 second, that's where the speed load begins to feel instant. You have that kind of really snappy load that just feels like the page loads instantly. But that said, probably the best test of speed is how does it feel on your PC or your laptop or your phone, particularly on your phone, because on a desktop computer, you usually have a lot of bandwidth and you have a lot of CPU power. So it's a lot more forgiving for sites that have a lot of JavaScript going on. They're doing a lot of heavy things. They have a lot of video, or they have stuff that needs a lot of processor power, whereas a smartphone is a lot less forgiving. So generally it'd be wise to test the speed on a phone. And if it's slow there, regardless of what any speed test tools tell you, then it's slow. So that's basically the two tools that we're using to test, like use a smartphone and pingdom. So if we get under 1 second in pingdom, usually we're loading lightning fast. And now under 1 second in the country that the site is hosted in. So it's important to keep that in mind. So typically once you're going across a border, particularly a water border, you'll see that the site is 0.5 second to 1 second slower. Now there are some ways around that. We use content delivery network, but the site will always load fastest in the country it's hosted in. So from a hosting the website perspective, it's always best to have the site hosted wherever the bulk of your customers are. So if it's North America, then the site should be in North America, and you have the option of East Coast and West Coast. And if it's Europe or it's Australia, it should ideally be hosted in that country. And if you're worldwide, probably in the US is probably the way to go. It's also important that you interpret the speed test results, because they can be skewed by time of day, server load, tracking codes, embedded things like videos, live chat, all sorts of stuff. So keep that in mind as well. The time of day is a big one. So we're in Australia. Most of our teams in Australia, we have a couple of people in Europe. But what we find is if we have a SpeedFix customer that is on poor quality hosting, the hosting actually runs really fast for us during the day, which is nighttime in the US, if they're a US customer. But in the US during the day, that can often be that the speed can be a lot different when those servers are under load. So the results always need to be interpreted. They're never going to be black and white. They'll always move up and down. And actually one of the live examples I have at the end, the speed test studied yesterday is different to what I have today. So we'll talk about that as well. All right. So commercial first always. I can't drive this home enough. So we never want to sacrifice the commerciality of the website for speed. There's a lot of people it's like an e-penis measuring competition that they just need to have this thing loading super fast and like these ridiculous speed times, and they'll cannibalize the site to get those fast loading speeds. But it's always important that we never want to sacrifice the conversions or commercial elements of the site to get a faster loading site. Pretty much the fastest loading site is a plain page of HTML with no images or no formatting, but that's probably not going to sell anybody. So it's really important to keep that in mind when you're looking at any kind of optimization, broadly speaking as well, not just for site speed. So any optimization you do into the websites, always keep those commercial goals in mind. It's also, we have customers sometimes who they come with this mindset that's a faster site will get them higher rankings and get them more customers, but the reality is upside down. So that thinking is around the wrong way. It needs to be flipped around. So a fast site, now I'm talking about sites that are already moderately fast. So going from moderately fast to lightning fast probably won't get you higher rankings. It probably won't get you conversions. What's actually happening is you're not losing those rankings or conversions that you would have had otherwise. So it's a negative deliverable. So what I'm saying is you already have those things and the slowness of the site is losing them. It's not gaining you anything, if that makes sense. So speed is a negative deliverable in a sense. So it's the cost of entry to a sale. So you'll only really feel the benefit of speed when you don't have it. You don't necessarily feel the benefit when you do have it. And for those people who want more conversions and you know, they want to sell more through the site, what they probably should be looking at is CRO, not necessarily site speed as their sole focus. So it's important to keep in mind. Those are some of the mindsets that we have customers come to us that are just, they're kind of well intended, but they're a little bit wrong. So yeah. Now, okay, so what actually matters to when it comes to site speed? So I'm just going to run through some technical things here and we can stop. This is basically our broad to-do list, and these will get you 80 to 90% of the way there if you want to optimize your site for speed, but we can stop on any of the particular points as if we need to. So it's, as a starting point, it's important to consider what type of site you have. So a content-only site that's just serving up pages of content, if it's a blog or a local business site that, you know, dentist website, for example, or they're just straight sales pages, that's going to be a very different optimizing experience to something that is using the database a lot. So WooCommerce, an LMS, or some other line of business system that is hammering the WordPress database. So those are really, broadly, if we could split sites into two, you know, those would be the two categories. The content-only sites are very simple. They don't really need to do anything other than serve up pages, whereas an LMS or WooCommerce is doing a lot, talking back and forth to the database, putting orders through, you know, collecting content. You know, if it has a forum or, you know, a membership site, it's pushing stuff into the WordPress database. So you can get away with really basic cheap hosting with a content-only site. For a database-heavy site, you're going to have to think about, you know, the performance of the server and the configuration. High traffic versus low traffic. Obviously, a high traffic site has different considerations. And then probably the other thing to be mindful of is how many simultaneous visitors are on the site. If they're concentrated in just a small amount of time, or the site is being hammered with traffic all at once, you're doing a launch or something like that, that needs to be taken into account. The location that you serve, whether it's a single country that you're operating in or worldwide, or how your traffic is skewed in terms of country. And then, you know, what sort of resource do you have? You know, you just a small business or a solo entrepreneur with, you know, you've got limited resources, or if you're a huge business or a 7-figure business with, you know, you've effectively got near unlimited resources to throw at speed. So those are important things to keep in mind when you're looking at this sort of stuff. The big one is probably point one, whereas are you content only or are you a database heavy site? And, you know, a lot of people with their membership site, they'll have two. They have their LMS on one site, and then the sales side or the main website, the marketing site, totally separate. So that would be a good example of those two different types of sites. So the sales side is very simple. It's just serving up pages, whereas the LMS side is actually quite heavy and it's doing a lot of work. So optimizing those two would be kind of a very different process. Okay, so a little bit technical here. So there's different layers when it comes to optimizing speed, and the site can be slow or fast in these different layers. So if something at the bottom of this pyramid is slow, or at the lower layers of this pyramid is slow, then the stuff stacked on top of it is going to have problems, or it's going to feel the effect of that slowness or that problem. So we always start at the base. So it's, you know, this is a very simple way of looking at speed, and it's, you know, using this model, we can really kind of work out where the root causes are of slow speed or where our opportunities are to optimize. So we all start at the base. So, you know, the web hosting, the quality of the web hosting, the location of the web hosting, the raw amount of server power available to us, and what hardware that's running on. So like we talked about before, having a good quality host is the absolute starting point. You're never going to get it running lightning fast or reliably if you're paying $3 a month. You have to be realistic about what you're paying. So, you know, for a basic website, $20 or $30 a month on hosting, you're going to get something that's nice and fast, that probably has very little downtime. And for a pretty typical content site, that'll be plenty. So we start there. Then we look at the server or the hosting configuration. So there's a lot of assumption that we see that I have a dedicated server on Amazon. I've got this AWS VPS server and it's got unlimited power and it's still going slow. And that's because the server configuration is poor. So the raw server power is only part of the speed picture. The server configuration is also important. So it's kind of like you can have a massive engine in a car, but if it handles poorly, then it's not going to go around the racetrack fast. So the server configuration is important. There are different server stacks, and the server can be optimized in different ways to go faster or slower. So that's an important one. The DNS hosting speed, so layer 3. This is a very common problem that almost nobody talks about online. So just from a technical perspective, you've kind of got 4 parts to your hosting. So you've got your domain name, or which you get from your domain registrar, so your www.domain.com. Then you have your DNS hosting, web hosting, and email hosting. So the DNS hosting converts the web addresses into IP addresses. So your computer or web browser knows where to go and find that server. So when you type something into a web browser, web address into a web browser, your computer goes and talks to the DNS server for your domain name to go and look up what the IP address is of that site or that domain name. So the DNS hosting speed is really important. So some DNS hosting is really slow, and it can take a second or 2 to reply to that request, whereas fast DNS hosting will take 10 or 20 milliseconds. So if you're on a poor quality DNS host, then you're never going to get to our ultimate goal, which is under that 1 second load time, because you're losing all that speed at the DNS hosting. So I'll talk about the provider we use in a minute. That's also free. Let's talk about point 4. So the connectivity or bandwidth that your server has. So, if you're, particularly for an LMS, if you're serving up zip files or MP4 files directly off the hosting itself, and you only have a small amount of bandwidth, that might be a problem. We see that sometimes. The server location, we've talked about that already, and then content delivery network, which is an easy way to speed up the site worldwide, which is really important, particularly if you're serving a worldwide audience. Caching is really important. So pretty much you really need caching for a WordPress site. So what caching does, it basically, in the simplest form, it pre-does the work before the visitor hits the website. So for example, page caching prepares the pages, all the database lookups, and the PHP processing is already done before the visitor hits the website. So they hit the website and they're served up a nice simple HTML file, as opposed to the server having to go and talk to the database and execute all this code before the visitor gets the page. So that's what caching is. And then the next layer above that is the uncached layer. So some things are not cacheable, some things can't be done in advance. So it's important that we take those into account. Then we have the page delivery to the user. So sending the data getting the data from the server, the web server, to the user's browser. So the delivery of the content in effect. Then the page render. So generally Google PageSpeed Insights is focused on the top 3. So layer 7, 8, and 9. So the page render is where Google PageSpeed Insights is really focused. Is once the user's device or the web browser has all the things it needs to show the web page, it has the HTML, the JavaScript, CSS, and the images, then it has to render that. So it has to put together that up and show you the web page. So that's that layer. And then the user experience with the page, how they interact with the page. So, things like pop-ups, things like fade-ins and transition effects all affect that kind of user experience and can affect their interpretation of the speed. So how the user feels, when they're using the website, how fast or slow it goes. So that's the model that we use when we look at speed. It's lots of different layers. There's lots of different components to it. And, a bottom layer component, if that has a problem, anything stacked on top of it will likely have a problem too. So hope that makes sense. It's kind of getting into technical terrain. All right. So broadly speaking, here are the steps to get to that magical 1 second mark. So we've talked about this several times now. Using a good host. Now, the host should have what's called HTTP2 protocol support. So this is the protocol that the web browser software uses to talk to the server. Now, there's 2 versions of this protocol. There is version 1.1, and then there's version 2, which is a few years old now. So if you're on really old hosting, or you've had your site hosted for 5 or 10 years, there's a fair chance that the host or that particular server you're on with your host doesn't have this particular protocol. So this protocol makes a big difference in terms of how quickly the browser can get stuff down from your web server and how quickly they can talk to each other. So we want to have a good quality host that supports the HTTP2 protocol, and that protocol needs to have the site running in SSL mode or HTTPS in order to work. So I think all of the browsers now, they want to see that the website's encrypted, and they have actively, this isn't part of that protocol, but the web browser software won't use the protocol unless it's over a secure channel. So I'll give you a tool at the end. I'll give you some links at the end. There's a tool that you can just put the site into that will test where you have that support. So, and I'll also give you a link to a video that will show you the difference between version 1.1 of the protocol and version 2. But that's really important for having the site loading snappy. Point 2, we use Cloudflare for DNS hosting. So Cloudflare is our DNS host of choice. It is also the fastest DNS host in the world. So that website there, DNSperf, perf.com, it ranks all the DNS providers in the world, or the top 100 DNS providers, I think it is, by speed. And Cloudflare has been consistently the #1 for years. So generally speaking, you know, if you're on a bad DNS host or a slow DNS host, moving to Cloudflare will get you often 1 or 2 extra seconds of speed. So that can make a huge difference. We also love Cloudflare because it is a content delivery network. It has, I think, of all the content delivery network options, it has the most servers worldwide. It has over 100 locations. So for most types of sites, now, if you have an LMS that is serving up heavy zip files, PDFs or MP4s or anything that is a chunky file, it's not going to be appropriate for those files. That would be the exception, but generally speaking, it'll be the fastest content delivery network. It also has a free plan, which is fine for most sites. It has a paid plan, which is $20 a month, I think. It might actually be slightly cheaper if you buy it through the web host, which also adds some other optimizations around images on top of that, and also security. So it has a higher level firewall that will filter out a lot of the crap hitting the website. So there's a lot of reasons there to use Cloudflare, and it's free as well. So, you know, it's a great price. The other thing, it'll also add, if your host doesn't have that HTTP2 protocol, it'll also add support for that. So that's an easy way kind of around that problem. Okay, point 3. So PHP is the programming language that WordPress is written in. So using PHP version 7 instead of the older version 5 generally will make the site 30% faster. So the more database heavy the site is, the faster the speed benefit. But for example, you know, WooCommerce is a big one where, particularly because you're doing a lot of work in the back end, managing orders and things like that, it will make the back end faster too. But most sites today should support that newer protocol, and it's just a matter of changing that in cPanel. Now you need to check compatibility first, and I'll give you a link to a plugin that you can run on the site. It takes 30 minutes to run, and it will tell you whether the site is PHP 7 compatible. But that's a big, easy speed boost, you know, and you'll get a 30% win roughly, both on the back end and front end, if not even more on the back end. Also, earlier versions than PHP, earlier versions than version 5.6 of PHP are no longer supported. So it is a little bit of a security risk. And I think PHP 5.6 is being phased out next year at some point. So you probably will have to make that change anyway. So that would be one to put on your to-do list. You'll get a security benefit and you'll get a speed benefit. Point 4, pretty simple, compress images with a compression plugin. Now we use Short Pixel right now. There's a lot of different image plugins out there that do roughly the same thing in terms of image compression. There'd be one thing I would say would be use use lossless compression instead of lossy compression. So you'll see there are options inside in almost all image compression plugins. There's different options for how compressed the images can be. You don't want to sacrifice the quality of the images. So lossless is less file size, but the same quality image. Lossy is less file size, but less quality. Now, there's a lot of stuff, you know, there's a lot of articles online where they compare the images side by side and you can barely notice the difference. But broadly across the whole site, you don't want to cannibalize the quality of your images for a small marginal increase in speed. So it's important to keep that in mind. A lot of speed test tools, and particularly PageSpeed Insights and some other ones, they want you to use really aggressive compression that, again, if we look at speed from a broader commercial perspective and making money perspective, photos are really, really important, and we don't want to damage the quality or hurt the quality of our photos for a little bit extra in terms of speed or a little bit smaller file size. There is a next level up of image compression that none of the speed test tools talk about right now, and that is using, so you have JPEG and you have PNG file formats. There's also another file format, .webp, that is a much smaller file size at the same quality, but not all browsers support it right now. So only, I think Chrome and Safari are the only two browsers that support it, but the file sizes are a whole lot smaller. So there's two ways. So that would be from a squeezing more out of images, like if you're a photography website, for example, that you can't do without a lot of images. One way to really squeeze more juice out of the file sizes would be to use WebP file format images. Now there's two ways to do that. Short Pixel is one of the reasons why we like Short Pixel, is it has a feature where it can inject special code into the website that gives the web browser the option of downloading the WebP image if it supports it. So that's one reason why we like it. And the other way to inject WebP images is to use Cloudflare, the paid version of Cloudflare. One of the image optimization features it has is swapping out JPEGs and PNGs for WebP images where it's appropriate and where the web browser supports it. So that would be, if you're very image heavy, that would be something to looking at getting WebP file format support. So you'll probably cover half the traffic or half the web browsers hitting your website if you have that functionality or those features in place with the site. Okay, so using caching. So you have to use caching on a WordPress website pretty much if your host doesn't support it. Now W3 Total Cache is pretty much the fastest caching plugin, but it's super technical. It's not very DIY. Most people don't know how to configure it. WP Rocket is not as fast, but it is much more DIY-able. So if you don't have any caching at the moment, WP Rocket would probably be the plugin to look at. Now it's important when we're talking about membership sites, you never want to cache any of the membership pages. Anything hidden behind a login, you can't really cache, because you'll end up in a scenario where those visitors, non-logged in visitors, will see the hidden membership content. So you need to be very mindful of having caching correctly configured on anything that has authentication or it's LMS, that anything that's hidden behind the login. So I wouldn't DIY, mess with any caching on your LMS site if you don't really know what you're doing or you're not super technical. There is another way to speed up the LMS website or anything that's database heavy like that, that won't expose the membership content, and that's to use database caching and object caching. Now you need to have, your server needs to support something called memcached in order to use that. So SiteGround does support it, for example, but other hosts like Bluehost and GoDaddy or cheaper hosts won't support it. So that would be something to dig into. If you have an LMS that is slow or not really performing super fast, you can use object caching, in some cases database caching, if your host has memcache support. So really getting into technical stuff there, so I won't go too much into that. But yeah, really important that you don't mess with page caching on an LMS site if you're not technical or not comfortable with tech stuff, because you will end up with stuff exposed to the world that shouldn't be. Some simple ones: disable any plugins and tracking code you're not using. So if you have analytics tools you've used in the past that still have the code on the website, just get rid of them. Often there's plugins that have been hanging around for years that can just easily be deleted, or duplicate plugins. Sometimes we see 3 or 4 plugins to do SEO things when the single, like Yoast, will do everything, and there's a sitemap plugin also installed. So any plugin duplication, old plugins, I mean, every plugin on the site needs a reason to exist. And every plugin executes code at some point. So don't use plugins. If site speed is important to you, don't use plugins just as an easy way out. For example, using plugins for tracking code where you could hard code the tracking code into the theme, or use something like Google Tag Manager. So quite often we'll get websites that have 3 or 4 plugins installed just to inject tracking code or analytics or live chat. So avoid using plugins if you can help it, in other words. Point 7, don't use any kind of fade-ins, soft loads, transition effects, animations or sliders or banners. All that sort of stuff adds delays into the site render or makes the perceived speed of the site slower. So particularly if you have animations and sliders, that feels slower to the visitor because the site needs to load before that animation can run. So anything like that we want to ideally disable, and it doesn't necessarily show up in a speed test tool, but will impact the way the speed feels to the visitor. Alrighty. Okay. We just talked about that. Banners and sliders. Banners are generally not great for conversion, so we want to get rid of banners wherever possible if they're not appropriate. Animations in banners, and then quite often we'll see sites that have multiple banners or slider plugins installed. So every plugin is well, particularly slider plugins are extremely heavy from a speed perspective and often load several JavaScript files. So we want to just be mindful of that. And video backgrounds are the same. So video backgrounds are very trendy and they can look great, but they're very heavy, both from a downloading stuff. Those are video files that could be 5 or 10 meg. So downloading those video files, they can be very heavy, and also they need a lot of processor power to execute, so they can feel very heavy, particularly on a slow device like a smartphone, and also on a desktop if it's a heavy video background. So you need to be mindful of that. I would say if you had the option not to use the video background, I'd get rid of it. Use uptime monitoring. We talked about that. Uptime robot. Little Warden is also a good tool for monitoring some of this technical stuff. Host in the country closest to the visitors. We talked about that. And then we talked about some of this advanced stuff. So cloud image compression for WebP file format support. Lazy loading stuff can be a really easy way to speed up the site. So lazy loading images and lazy loading YouTube videos. So what that means is that those elements on the page don't load until the user scrolls down that far. And we can also lazy load some of that third-party tracking code and live chat code using Google Tag Manager. And I won't talk about it here, but I can link you up to a video that explains that in more detail. Particularly some tracking codes and some live chat codes are really slow and heavy, and we can kind of lazy load those using a trick inside Google Tag Manager to really lighten that initial page load. And a really advanced one would be there's a technique we can use HTML caching inside Cloudflare, but I won't really talk about that in any detail because it's super technical. Okay, I think we're up to the live examples, Chris.
Awesome, man. Dude, that is a plethora of information. I'm gonna have to rewatch this and like really dig in.
Yeah,
thanks
it's
for
pretty
sharing.
technical.
Yeah, I mean, you know your way around. That's amazing. It's like an integrated thing. It's not like a magic bullet. You gotta, there's all these different areas you gotta work on. I really appreciate you kind of all that.
Yeah, so it can be quite overwhelming, but those 10 points or whatever would get you 80 or 90% of the way there. So yeah, and they seem technical, but once you got to implement them, like image compression is pretty easy. Install a plugin and run it and follow the instructions, and that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I've poked around with some of that stuff, and it's like you said, you just got to kind of roll up your sleeves and get into it if you want to do it. But yeah, that's comprehensive. I really appreciate that.
Cool. Well, should we get into these examples?
Yeah, let's see them.
Well, I'm going to look at your site to start with.
Okay. Go ahead and throw me under the bus.
All right. So let's.
I have no ego.
Well, actually, let me just switch back to my browser. We'll go live, and this could be dangerous if my internet doesn't play the game. Okay. So this was
Well, I just wanted to ask a question real quick. So LifterLMS.com is like a website, and then we have some subdomains, but you're looking at like the main.com.
Yep. Okay. The main website.
Yeah, which is for those of you watching, and we do have a lot of WooCommerce users. This is a content-heavy site that's mostly a WooCommerce store.
Cool. Yeah, so I took this screenshot a few days ago, and then I ran the test this morning just before we jumped on the call, and it was actually quite a bit faster. So this is a perfect example of the speed being variable. So we went from 2.5 seconds there to 1.7 seconds. So the speed does move up and down with the time of day. And
so we're not under one.
Not under one, but I have some things that might get you there. So.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, the time of day, also the load on the speed test tool, there's all different things that play into that. So it's important to keep that in mind when you look at this stuff. And also run the test a few times, because you'll get different results every time we run it. So there was a couple of, let's talk about some key points here. So I'll just bring this back up to full screen if I can. Yeah, here we go. Okay. Okay, so you had 2.5 second load time.
I love my chatbot though, man. I like
there is a way to resolve that. So
Okay.
the Drift live chat was actually blowing out your load time. So that when we look at
really? Okay.
when we look at the speed, we kind of break it into two. So we look at the core of the website, so everything that's loading off WordPress and loading off the hosting, which we have almost total control over. And then we look at all the third-party stuff, the analytics code, the live chat, the remarketing code, Facebook tags, that sort of stuff. So we don't have that much control over the third-party stuff other than, some tracking codes will load faster if we put them in the footer of the site. We can just remove some tracking codes if they're not actively being used. In some cases, you might be using an old tracking code that is out of date and there's a newer, faster one. So in your case, the Drift live chat was blowing you up in almost all elements of speed. So 2.5 second load time, you had a 3.7 meg page size. So 1.5 meg of that was images, and then 1.3 meg of that was your Drift and your Wistia video.
Oh, wow.
So, half the page is effectively Drift and Wistia, which is huge. So,
and we can lazy load that somehow.
So there is a technique we can use. So what we do with the lazy loading of the live chat. So we take the live chat code, we use Google Tag Manager, and I have a video. I can drop the link in later. But basically, we add a delay into that code in Tag Manager. So we add a 5 or 6 second delay. So what happens is the site loads up. It's nice and fast. It's loading without that 1.3 meg of Drift stuff, and then Google Tag Manager starts its counter in the background, and 5 seconds later, it goes and pulls through the live chat code. So from a visitor perspective, it doesn't really affect they're not going to load up the site and 1 second later go to the live chat. So it doesn't really affect their experience with the live chat, but it does have a big impact on the speed. So that's one
awesome.
sneaky way we solve that problem. We also, so Active Campaign code can also be very heavy as well. So we do that a lot with Active Campaign because it's not going to make a huge difference to the reports inside Active Campaign if it has a few seconds delay on the load as well. So I'll link up a video there that will explain that. It sounds really complex, but it's really simple. And then the images. So you probably get quite a bit of saving if you had WebP images instead of JPEGs and PNGs. So on some browsers, you'd have about 800 kilobytes of savings.
And you're saying that's only Chrome and Safari at this point?
Yeah, I think it's Chrome and Safari and Opera maybe browser as well. So, but
I think we're using a plugin called Smush It, but I don't even know what that does.
Yeah, so Smush It will compress the images, but it won't do the WebP. So
Okay.
Short Pixel will. There's a section inside Short Pixel that it says it's something like add picture tags, replace image tags with picture tags. So
yeah.
So what that does, it just gives the browser different options for the images. So it'll have the JPEG image, the original JPEG, and then it'll have the alternate WebP file format. So if the browser supports WebP, it'll just pick up the WebP file. So in your case, if we go, I won't run the test, but I'll just load it up. There is this test here. Oops, it's called Cloudinary. So this tool here from doing stuff live on a webinar, so it's risky. Doesn't want to load up. Hang on. So there is a tool that we use.
Is that a browser extension or something?
No, it's just a full. I'll load it up here in a different browser window. It's an image compression test tool, so it'll tell us. I won't run the test, but here it is here. Oh, maybe I'll get onto the window. Okay, it's from a company called Cloudinary. So it'll run the site, and I'll just throw the link in because I can't get across to the window with the two screens. Hang on. There we go. So this tool here, if you run the website through it, it takes a couple of minutes to run. It'll give you an indication of what kind of compression you'll get with WebP files instead. So yours came out to about 800 kilobytes difference or something like that. So it's half the size. So you go from 1.5 meg of images to about 800K.
Cool.
Yeah, so pretty simple. And Short Pixel It has a free version that will compress 100 images, I think, but the paid version, it's like $10 for 10,000 images or something, so it's dirt cheap. So it's basically nothing. So yeah. The other things you had on yours, you had 166 resources downloading, so that's quite high. So on a fast loading website, we'd only have between 50 and 100. So again, your drift and Wistia was kind of blowing that out. Your time to first byte, so how long the HTML takes to download, was a little bit high at 450 milliseconds. But I wouldn't sweat that too much. That's, it's a WooCommerce site. It's quite heavy, so you'd expect that. Potentially you could lazy load that Wistia video, but Wistia is probably the fastest of all the videos. So YouTube, Vimeo, it can be quite slow, whereas Wistia is pretty fast to load. So I wouldn't sweat that. It's really your Drift live chat that's really blowing up. And I'd probably just monitor the opt-in monster, and active campaign can be slow sometimes, but it's not. Your live chat is really what's blowing up and what's causing that kind of variable speed. So
that's a good point. And I think, not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, we have our Drift live chat thing set to be on a delay anyways. Mm-hmm. So like we're actually slowing it down, even though it's on a delay anyways. It might as well lazy load the thing. It makes sense.
Exactly. But you were pretty well optimized from a code perspective. It was looking good. Those are really the kind of big chunks. The drift was really the thing that was hurting you. So yeah. So that's you. And then I had an example Kathy sent through. I'm not going to try and pronounce this website, but
it's a painting site, I believe.
Painting site?
An art, learn to paint site.
So we had 3-second load for this one. And I think it was a little bit faster as well if I switch back. We had it over here. So it was a little bit faster at 2.8. Again, kind of highlights just the variable nature of the speed. What's my window?
What is the, do you have is the URL on there?
This one here. Let's reload it.
Atelier Roussard. I'm not sure if you're on the call. I just wanted you to know if you are. I'm not sure if he's on the call or not, but yeah, he submitted for the list to be reviewed. So
cool. So this was actually, I was surprised. So he has kind of a GIF or a video background at the top.
Which you were saying to be careful about, right?
Yeah, but in this case, we take commerciality into account. This is a site about, drawing and imagery. So I'd kind of give it a pass for it. And it also really isn't affecting the speed. It's done really, really well. It's probably one of the best I've ever seen in terms of a video background. He only had a couple of issues really that, so he had 1.5 meg site size, which is really small for this type of site, given he's dealing with images. But he took 3 seconds to load. So he had, basically his issue was time to first byte. So he's on SiteGround, which you'd expect to be fast. So SiteGround is probably, in terms of the cPanel hosts, like cheap hosting, is probably the fastest one.
So SiteGround is the best cheap host for speed, basically.
Yeah, I guess everyone has a different definition of cheap, but in terms of panel hosts, like compared to HostGator or Bluehost, it's really fast. And one of the reasons is because they have that, we talked about that mem cache, that memory caching for database and object caching, which just gives the site so much more juice. So yeah, he's on SiteGround, which we would expect typically if we had a SiteGround customer, we would be able to get them loading in about 800 milliseconds, maybe 1 second. So I'd say maybe there's a plugin he has. So long as he has, I'd assume he has caching set up. If not, then that would fix the problem. But if he has caching already, there's probably some other plugin that's interfering with the page load. So some plugins, particularly like any plugin that's injecting code into the page, can slow the site down a lot. So there might be a plugin he has that is causing some sort of issue if he has caching set up. So
Mr. Roussard, you should probably get in touch with Brendan on this one. And I just want you to know in the audience, Anthony is saying that his site is 4.59 seconds and he's very ready for your help, Brendan.
What's his web address? Let's do a live on it if you want.
All right, Anthony, you're going live here. So type into the chat what your web address is. It's astrologyuniversity.com. It's in the chat too if you just want to click on it.
Okay. All right. Let's just load it up so we can see this one here, I assume.
Let us know if we've got the right site there, Anthony.
Yeah, I can see it's taking a while
Yep.
to load.
Yeah, he's saying that's the right one.
All right, so let's stick it into. I assume let's just use this North America data center testing from.
Where do you live, Anthony? What country are you in? Just let us know. He's West Coast, US.
Okay. All right, so it's not like it's a fairly basic site. There's nothing that in theory should be slowing him down. Let's see what it says. Okay. It's a bit bigger. Okay.
5 seconds.
All right, so definitely slow here. Say the page size is pretty big at 4.5 meg, so there might be 1 or 2 images that are really big, and 160 requests definitely on the high side. If we scroll down, I'll just Pingdom actually just changed their interface, so it's not as nice as it used to be. So let's interpret the results here. So like we talked about before, so we have the core of the site, and which we have a lot of control over, and then we have the third-party elements. So for him, so you can see here his time to first byte. So this is the HTML file, effectively the HTML file that's loading here. So this is where he's really slowing down. So it's taking 4 seconds basically to load. So it would appear that he has no caching at all set up. That's what I'd guess there. You can also see, so if you hover over, so in Pingdom, the narrow, the more skinny these elements are, the faster they're loading. And if you hover over them, it will give you a breakdown of how, the individual components of the speed there. So you can see there his DNS hosting there is taking 376 milliseconds. So it's taking nearly half a second or close to half a second to resolve the DNS. So I'd probably say if he moved to Cloudflare, that would cut that down to 10 to 20 milliseconds. So there's probably 2 things to do there. One is to look at caching. The other is maybe look at Cloudflare. If we scroll down, so you can see that the hosting itself is probably good quality, because all these elements, once the HTML file loads, all the other elements are loading really fast, and they're all loading in 50 to 100 milliseconds. So the hosting
you're saying
itself,
it's predominantly caching.
Yeah, I would say so. And then, so we had 5-second total load time. So he probably has a second of other elements loading up. So Sumo, AppSumo or Sumo can be a little bit slow at times. So every feature inside Sumo loads up a JavaScript file. So there's a couple of things I'd look at there. Is turn off any features in Sumo that aren't being actively used. That will reduce the amount of files it's loading. And quite often people install Sumo and they haven't used it, or they're not looking at the features, or aren't using the opt-ins anymore. They've moved on to something else. So quite often it can just be removed. There's other things going on here. So this is very common with, I'm guessing as WooCommerce, this get refreshed fragments. This is probably WooCommerce. What that does, that usually controls the cart icon in the header. So it updates the cart icon across the site when the page loads, and quite often it doesn't do anything. So there is a plugin you can get that disables that. So you can see that it's 1.4 seconds of load time there. So what that's doing, the website's going back to the server and sending a request. It's probably asking the server how many items are in the cart, and the server sending that back. So if there's no, I didn't see a cart icon in the header, so if we're not using that cart, we can probably disable that. There's plenty of plugins that are called disable cart fragments or something along those lines that will just get rid of that. It'll just disable that function. And so that'll cut out whatever that is, 1.4 seconds of load. And then everything else you can see here, this is live chat. We've got a lot of live chat stuff. Almost all live chat tools are slow because they're very heavy, so they need several files to load. And basically the live chat is a whole application. So usually there's 10 to 20 files that load to drive the live chat. So this is very common here, where we see all this stuff loading in the last kind of 1 to 2 seconds of the load. So you can see here we have live chat code and then a lot of Sumo stuff. So, so I'd say the to-do list would be look at Cloudflare, sort out the page caching, make sure that that's working. If it doesn't look like it's working, if there's a plugin installed already, it's probably not working. Turn off anything at Sumo that's not actively being used. If you're just using opt-ins and things like that inside of Sumo, we often switch people to Thrive leads, because everything, it does, there's so many different opt-in plugins, but Thrive Leads loads everything out of the WordPress instance instead of third-party servers. And then I'd look at lazy loading the live chat. Those would be the big hit list. And that would probably get him down to around 1.5 seconds-ish consistently, if not faster. So
that's awesome. He's saying thank you in the chat, by the way. He's really appreciative.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, interpreting the results like this, just going through this list and just looking at the files and anything that's long is a good place to start. I mean, it's pretty clear what is causing the speed here, because you can, kind of identify the fatter ones or the longer lines. So yeah. All right. So that's pretty much it. I think was the last slide.
Should we go into Q&A?
Yeah. So I've got a link here, wpspeedfix.com/lifter webinar, that has some links to those tools as well that we talked about. So those test tools and some of those plugins and things like that as well. And I'll add the tag manager lazy load video into that as well. So I'll do that after we jump off the call.
Awesome. We'll put that link in the chat. You've got some questions rolling in, and I've got a few for you as well.
Cool. Fire away.
So when you're, Lionel is asking if you're using a CDN, does it make a difference when you're using the speed test tools? I'm not sure if I 100% understand the question, but
the CDN in theory should speed up the website load. So there's a couple of things there. So generally, content delivery network is a network of servers around the world. So in theory, a large proportion of the website content should load off the server closest to the visitor. So different content delivery networks have different numbers of servers, and they work slightly differently. It should be faster. The CDN should impact the speed in a positive way. Sometimes, depending on how the CDN is configured, if it's configured badly from a technical perspective, it might actually slow down the site. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that does.
Let me ask you a question just to help people understand, especially if they're newer to the, the tech space and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I believe SiteGround is located in Eastern Europe. I could be totally wrong on that. WP Engine is based out of Austin, Texas. I don't know where their servers are or whatever. But does a CDN essentially mean no matter where you are in the world, it's supposed to load fast? Is that basically the promise?
Yeah, well, we'll speed the site up worldwide, but there's always elements that have to be fetched from the home server, the original source server.
Wherever it is physically.
Yeah, so it's always best to have that in the country where most of the visitors are. And if you're equally worldwide, then hosting it somewhere in the US would be the way to go, because you're hitting the bulk of probably English-speaking traffic anyway, and the connectivity is generally going to be the fastest in the US. So. But the CDN will speed up a lot of the website for across the world. So also, some CDNs don't cover the whole world. So Max CDN, they've just merged with another company. I don't know their name, but there is. So WP Engine uses Max CDN, and by default, Max CDN doesn't have the locations in Asia and Australia turned on. It's a feature they call Flex Zone. So in that case, a third of the world isn't covered by the content delivery network. So that's an important consideration too. So understanding the coverage of your content delivery network provider is important. So
Adam Silver is just commenting that SiteGround, the company, is in Sofia, Bulgaria, and they have servers in Chicago, London, Amsterdam, and Singapore. So for whatever that's worth.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Another question, John is asking, it's a valuable presentation. Will the slides be made available? That means you did a good job, because you're
yeah. If you go to that link, there's a link to this Google Slides file if you go to that link. So.
Excellent. And John, we will be sending out a replay of the video. So if you want to see the video again, you'll get an email about that since you registered for this webinar. And on the LifterLMS website at the bottom, there's a little webinars training tab if you ever want to go find one. Thoughts? Robert is asking your thoughts on magnification plugins. I think he meant to say minification, actually.
I think so. Yeah, so we use, generally we use auto optimize.
Is this an image thing?
No, it's minifying and combining the CSS and JavaScript files.
Okay.
So, yeah, so we use auto optimize. I would start looking in the theme settings first, because quite often the theme will do a lot of that work. So I'd check through a lot of themes have a performance section now that you can turn on a lot of stuff that will speed up the website that by default is turned off, or when the site was in development, those things kind of interfere with development. So minification will help. There's a lot of speed test tools focus a lot on minification. It's a fairly marginal improvement, because it's if you think about it, minification removes line breaks and spaces and extra like comments inside code. So there's minification of JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. So it compresses the files very slightly, but we're talking about, it might be a few hundred bytes or maybe 1 or 2 kilobytes. The thing is, the web server is also already compressing. It uses the web server uses gzip compression, so it's effectively zipping the file before it sends it. So it's already quite compressed. So while speed test tools focus a lot on minification, from a practical real world perspective, it doesn't do that much. What does combining the CSS files, if you have a lot of JavaScript and a lot of CSS, using the combining function will speed them up in some cases. But what will speed them up even more that none of the speed test tools right now talk about is that HTTP2 protocol. So to explain what that new protocol does, in effect, it does 2 main things. So with the version 1.1, so on the Lifter site, I think we had 166 things that needed to download from the homepage. So what would happen is the browser loads up the server, and there's loads up the site, and there's 166 things to download. So it needs to make 166 connections to the server. So that's a lot. With the newer version 2 protocol, it makes 1 connection. So everything comes down over that single connection. So there's much less network overhead. So that gives you a much more snappy kind of feel, like the website feels like it loads really fast. So that's one benefit of that new protocol. The other benefit of the protocol is it has something called push, HTTP2 push. So what happens is the browser connects to the web server and the browser starts processing and starts requesting files, and the web server replies back and says, you need these other files as well to load this page, and it sends them without them being requested. So it kind of, the new protocol removes a lot of the overhead in effect. So that supersedes some of those recommendations you'll see around the web and from speed test tools around minification and combining JavaScript and CSS.
That's awesome. And we've got a few more questions here. And before we get to those, if anybody wants to raise your hand and ask a question live, there's a little feature in Zoom where you can raise your hand. If you'd like to chat live, feel free to do that. We're also going to be drawing our LifterLMS giveaway winner here in just a little bit. This is just part 1 of a 2-part series. Tomorrow, Brendan's going to be talking about SEO. So if you liked what you're hearing today, we're going to be getting into SEO tomorrow. Lisa asks, she says you mentioned Cloudflare a lot. Will it work okay for a database-heavy website without revealing private information? So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or you.
Yeah, it shouldn't reveal any database information. So it's basically like a website. Broadly, it's a website acceleration service. So it won't do anything that a website isn't already doing, I think, if that makes sense. So it's just basically, it has a content delivery network, and it adds some newer protocols that most web hosting doesn't have or might not have all of them. So yeah, you shouldn't have a security risk of anything that will add security in to like a database website.
That's cool. You mentioned something which I just want to highlight, where sometimes people are on really old hosting. Like if you've been an entrepreneur for a while and perhaps you signed up for your GoDaddy account or whatever 7 years ago, you might be on some really old hardware. And that's and some things you can just call and ask them to upgrade you, or ask them to upgrade your version of PHP. Sometimes it's a quick fix, and you may be suffering just because you were early to the party.
Mm.
So I just wanted to throw that out there. Do you have any comments on that? Do you see that happen much?
Yeah, particularly like those shared hosts, because they're stacking thousands of sites on one server. So once
Yeah.
the server's full, it's kind of, they'll run it until, a lot of the time they don't upgrade it. So, or it might be on old hardware or in a slow data center or something like that. So yeah. I think it's like your cell phone plan, right? The cell phone plans change every like 2 months. It's
Yeah.
kind of like the new ones are usually way better value, and they won't tell you about it. So it's just, I guess, reviewing those things on a regular basis is probably a wise thing to do. And yeah, and the uptime monitoring is a big one, because that's kind of a leading indicator of problems. So having that, and just keeping an eye on it. If the site starts to go down, 99, it's probably fine 99.9% of the time, but then you might have a week where something starts to go a bit funny and you're getting these downtime alerts, and it could be that hosting has a problem, or in some cases it could be someone trying to hack the site, or you're getting hammered with, the site is getting scraped. We had one on the weekend actually where an SEO scraper was pushing one of our WooCommerce clients offline. It was just absolutely hammering the checkout. So, and ordinarily the site was loading really fast, and the uptime monitoring started throwing up alerts. So, yeah, the uptime monitoring is a great kind of broad test or monitor of, the quality of the hosting and how the site's going. Because most people don't go to their own site that often either. So,
Yeah.
and the site is already cached, like if you're going to the site all the time, it's already got that cached on your browser, so you're not experiencing the site as a brand new visitor too. So that's another thing to keep in mind when you're loading your site. Hold the shift key down on your keyboard and then hit the reload, and that'll force the web browser to go and fetch a brand new, fresh version of everything on the site. So it would probably be a very different experience doing that as well, loading it up, or just loading it in a different browser to what you'd normally use.
Yeah, a lot of people don't clear their cache or whatever. I mean, try clearing that thing and seeing what happens.
Yep.
Lisa just said thank you for answering her question about Cloudflare. Adam was saying that be careful when you upgrade versions of PHP, because just for plugin compatibility, you should do a backup first, which is always good. He also dropped a link to something called ip-neighbors.com to see who you're sharing your shared hosting with. I didn't know you could do that, but that's kind of cool. It's probably kind of scary, and maybe you should get over to a main WordPress host. But yeah, thanks for sharing that, Adam. Can you tell us more about what you offer over at WP Speedfix? And we'll post a link in the chat. But like, what do you do over there? I mean, you're educating the DIY person over here in this training, but what do you offer over there?
Yeah, so we're actually in the process of changing the lineup a little bit, but we broadly have three main speed packages right now. So one is a basic broad strokes, our standard optimization. It's just we run through and set everything up in the best practices format. So generally that's for people who have a slow site and just want it fast. Then we have a middle layer planner business, which is optimization. So we actively look at the site. We're like, hey, this needs to be fixed. We can do create a bit more of a strategy around making it fast. And then we have higher level, more consulting type services where there might be bigger sites that, they might have there might be a web app or something like that, it's basically a consulting service. So we work one-on-one with their developers or with them to work out what needs to be done to speed it up. And on a bigger site, and it's also important to keep in mind, a bigger site, some of these are serious changes. Like on a web app, you can't just go changing DNS hosting because you feel like there's an on-flow effect to everything that's plugged into that and everything else. So the bigger the site, the more traffic that you have on the site, the bigger deal some of these. You need basically change management around some of these things. You can't just jump into WordPress and start deleting things and changing plugins as you want. So
Yeah,
important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Anthony was asking if you had any kind of he's any kind of special offer for WP Speedfix, any coupons or anything like that. Maybe he should follow up with you offline or something. But he's just asking that question.
Well, I haven't set one up, but let's do one. Let's do a $20 off, and
Okay.
So don't use it yet. Give me a couple hours to set it up.
Give him some time here. You're getting this
the
live.
coupon code LifterLMS. Let's do that.
There you go, Anthony. You got a live teardown of your site and a coupon code. So I don't know how much more value we can bring in a webinar there. So thanks for that. Um, so we're going to draw our LifterLMS giveaway winner. So Kathy, let me know when you're ready of who won the $99 add-on. And we'll get that over to you in a sec. And again, this is part of a 2-day series. Tomorrow night with Brendan, we're doing SEO for course creators, WordPress LMS websites. I found Brendan's course. I went through it and I applied what I learned to my WooCommerce store, and I started getting results right away. It's one thing to learn a bunch of theory, but what I really like about Brendan's training is it goes right into action and with very simple action steps. And I love how you start your course. Like as a course creator, you guys should check out Brendan's course, this is what we're going to talk about tomorrow. But he teaches things, but then he gets right into action. He's like, do this, this, and this. This is the low hanging fruit. Let's like take care of all these like simple wins. And I just really enjoyed the experience as a student. You know, I'm always on like the instructor side. So being on the student side, I was like, this is awesome. And that's what we're getting in tomorrow. So if you like today, I think you're going to like tomorrow even more. So we've drawn our winner. It is, let me see if I can pronounce this. It is Louay Abdul Baki. You have won the $99 LifterLMS add-on of your choice. If you want you can use that on a single add-on, or you can apply it to a bundle. If you happen to already be a LifterLMS customer, we can apply it to your license and extend that value into the future. Email us at team@lifterlms.com and we'll set you up with that. Congratulations, Louay. Brendan, thanks for doing this, man. This has been a lot of fun, and I learned a ton. I'm gonna have to rewatch this and then, create a list of stuff to do and check out WP Speedfix. Yeah, I appreciate it, man. You know your stuff, and I appreciate the deep dive with the LifterLMS community.
Cool, man. My pleasure.
Awesome. So for those of you watching, head on over to wpspeedfix.com/lifter webinar. We're about to close this out. If you need any of the links that we have dropped in the chat, go ahead and look through that and see if you need anything, need to grab anything before we call it a day. We will be back the same time tomorrow, and we're going to be talking about SEO for course creation sites. And yeah, everybody, let's give Brendan a thank you in the chat. And yeah, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it. We are going to be sending out a replay. So I'd recommend watching this one again when you get that email, or just save it when you're ready to get into implementation mode and start speeding up your site. Because going from 5 seconds to 1 second sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Kimberly's going to be back tomorrow night. Thanks for coming, Kimberly. And yeah, thanks, Brendan. Appreciate it, and hope you have a great rest of your day. We'll catch you the same time tomorrow.
Sounds good. I'll catch you then.
All right. Cheers.